My father was never a man of mystery. He was as ordinary as sunlight on a dusty courtyard. A man of work, prayer, and habits. People used to say he was like 5 people in one, because he could do everything: mend a fence, settle a quarrel, tell a story, recite a verse, and sit quietly for hours without complaint. That steadiness had been the background music of our home for as long as I could remember. When he passed away, it was sudden. A stillness fell over the house that didn't feel like any stillness I had known before. Normally after death, the air feels heavy with grief, but this was different. There was something sharper at the edge of it, like the taste of metal. The morning after his death, before we began the preparations for the Gussel ritual washing, I noticed at first a single bird landing on the roof, crying in a strange, clipped tone. Then another, then more. Within an hour, the sky above our home was no longer sky, but a whirling storm of wings. Hundreds, no, thousands of birds perched on trees, power lines, even the eaves of our house, as though drawn by a magnet only they could sense. Their bodies shuddered with restless energy. Their cries were not the usual morning chatter, but a harsh, echoing chorus that filled the air like a warning. Neighbors began coming to pay respects, their eyes darting upward at the sight. "Never seen so many birds together," one whispered. Another muttered a prayer under his breath. My younger cousins hid behind doorframes, peeking out at the black, fluttering mass overhead. Even our courtyard, usually sunlit and warm, seemed dimmer under the shadow of so many wings. Then came the wind. It started as a breath, the kind of breeze that moves the tips of leaves. By mid-morning, it had gathered itself into a steady, circling draft, pushing against doors and shutters. By afternoon, it had teeth. Dust spun into small spirals at the corners of the yard. The sound of it mingled with the birds' cries until it was impossible to tell which was which. The whole compound felt like it was holding its breath. Inside, we tried to keep our focus. We laid out the white cloth, the bowls of water, the soap, the clean towels. Relatives murmured prayers, but every now and then someone's eyes would flick to the windows where feathers drifted past like ash. The wind pressed against the walls as if it wanted to be let in. I remember looking at my father's face, calm in death, and feeling an odd mix of grief and unease. I wanted to believe the birds were a coincidence, that the wind was only weather, but in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered, "Something has shifted." When the imam arrived to supervise the Gussel, he paused on the threshold, glanced at the sky, and then quickly stepped inside. He didn't comment on the birds. He simply rolled up his sleeves and began reciting softly under his breath. My relatives followed suit, focusing on the task at hand, but their movements were quicker than usual, their hands trembling slightly. We washed my father gently, turning him this way and that, pouring warm water over his body, wiping his limbs, combing his hair for the last time. The coffin, the white shroud, lay folded neatly nearby like an unwritten page. Even through my tears, I could hear the outside world, the wind knocking against the shutters, the shrill calls of unseen wings. It felt like the house was no longer just ours, but crowded with presences we couldn't see. By the time the Gussel was done, the courtyard had grown darker, though the day was still young. Clouds gathered low and heavy, and the birds seemed to tighten their circle above us, swooping lower now and then as if to look inside. The air smelled of rain and something else, a smell like old iron or wet earth, sharp and metallic. As we wrapped him in the coffin and prepared to take him to the mosque for janazah, I felt a shiver pass through me, not from cold, but from the unmistakable sense that the world outside had changed shape. It was as if grief had cracked something open, and now, the wind and the birds and whatever lay beyond the trees were looking in. We lifted him gently, carrying him out of the house for the last time. The birds scattered upward in a single motion, an explosion of black wings. The wind rose like a voice behind us, and in that moment, with his weight in our arms and the sky darkening above, I knew that whatever was happening was not ordinary. This was only the beginning. The road to the mosque felt longer than it ever had, even though it was only a few minutes from our home. Rain began to tap the windshield, soft at first, and then harder, as if testing its own strength. The sky had sunk low and heavy. The birds followed us for a while, a black ribbon twisting overhead, before peeling away into the treetops. We arrived just before the call to Maghrib. The mosque stood like a quiet island in the rain. Low walls, pale minarets, the calligraphy above the entrance blurred by water. The courtyard, usually empty at this hour, was crowded. Neighbors, distant relatives, men from the bazaar, and even a few people I didn't recognize had gathered. Some held umbrellas, some just stood in the rain with their heads bowed. There was a hush over the crowd, the kind of silence that isn't absence of sound, but the weight of too many thoughts at once. Inside, the mosque smelled of wet clothes and old prayer mats. The muezzin gave us space, leading us to the center. We laid my father's shrouded body down on the cool tiles. Water dripped from our cuffs and pooled at the edges of the coffin. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. The imam at the front, the rows of men ready to pray, the children pressed against the back wall. Only the sound of the rain on the roof remained, like fingers drumming on tin. Then the prayers began. The imam's voice rose, deep and steady, the words rolling like a low tide. People wept softly as they recited. The sound of grief echoed off the domed ceiling, multiplying until it felt like 1,000 voices at once. My own throat tightened as I whispered the words, my eyes fixed on the white shape before me. And then, over the prayers and the rain, another sound began. At first, it was faint, a high thin note that seemed like the wind. But it grew, and it came not from the mosque itself, but from beyond its walls. It was a sound that did not belong to grown men at prayer. Small, fragile voices, crying. Not just one or two, but many. The kind of sound you would expect from a cluster of frightened children in the dark. Heads began to lift. People glanced at one another. The imam's voice faltered for half a breath, but continued. I looked toward the windows. Beyond the glass, the night had thickened into a wall of trees at the mosque's edge. The leaves shivered under the rain, and between the trunks there was movement, like shadows, too small and quick to be animals. The cries rose and fell in waves, threaded with a strange rhythm, as though calling and answering. They were not the random sobs of frightened kids. There was something deliberate about them, a kind of chorus. The hairs on my arms stood up. Children, someone whispered behind me. Who brought children here? But there were no children in the mosque except a few silent boys clutching their father's hands. Another man muttered, "It's the jungle," and crossed himself. I stared at the trees, straining to see. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw shapes. Not clear, not solid, but the suggestion of small figures crouched among the roots, pale faces tilted upward. Then the rain sheeted harder against the glass and blurred everything. The imam brought the prayer to its close faster than usual. When the final Amin was spoken, a silence fell, a silence thick with fear. The crying from the jungle did not stop. If anything, it sounded nearer now, closer to the edge of the courtyard. We lifted the coffin again, hands trembling. I felt the weight of my father, the slickness of the wood beneath my fingers, and the prickling sense that invisible eyes were following us. As we carried him out, the crowd parted without a word. The rain soaked us immediately. Somewhere beyond the mosque, thunder rolled low and slow, like a warning. We loaded the coffin into the first car. My relative and I climbed in with the driver. The rest of the family squeezed into the second car. Our headlights carved 2 tunnels of light into the storm as we pulled away from the mosque. As the minarets disappeared behind us, I looked back one last time. The trees beside the mosque swayed under the wind. In the flicker of lightning, for an instant, I thought I saw the shapes again. Small forms crouched low, faces glinting pale through the rain. And though the windows were up, and the engine loud, I could still hear them, the crying, thin and high, following us into the night. It was only later I would understand how close those cries were to what was waiting ahead. The road out of the town was a ribbon of black water. Rain hammered the windshield like 1,000 small stones, and every few seconds, the wipers would clear it just enough for us to see the trees and fields sliding by. In the back of the car lay my father's coffin, the white cloth of the coffin hidden inside the dark wooden box. The driver hunched forward over the wheel, knuckles white, as if leaning his body could push the car through the storm faster. I sat in the back seat, my shoulder pressed against my cousin's. Neither of us spoke. Every so often I wiped the window with my palm, looking for the lights of the second car, but all I could see was the smear of rain and the endless blackness behind us. The wind outside had teeth now. It clawed at the car doors and made the trees bend low over the road. We were about 12 kilometers from our village when it began. A sound from the back of the car, soft at first, like someone tapping their fingers on wood. "Did you hear that?" my cousin whispered. I nodded, my heart already thudding. The driver didn't answer. He had turned the radio on low, muttering under his breath. The tapping came again, sharper this time. It was a rhythm, not random. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow raps from inside the coffin. We stared at each other. "It's the rain," I said quickly, though my voice trembled. Just the rain. But the rain sound was a hiss and a rush. This was different. The tapping came once more, then stopped. And then, impossibly, a scraping noise, like a latch being worked loose. Before we could speak, the car gave a violent shudder. The engine coughed and died. The headlights flickered and went out, plunging us into a dim grayness lit only by the lightning flashing overhead. We coasted to a stop on the empty road. "What happened?" my cousin demanded. The driver twisted the key again and again, but the engine only whined. "I don't know. Everything just..." A sound from behind us cut him off. It was not tapping this time. It was wood shifting. We turned as one. The coffin lid was moving. I swear, I saw the nails, 4 of them hammered at the corners, trembling as if pushed from the inside. Slowly, with a creak that set my teeth on edge, the lid lifted at the head. Rain was pounding on the roof of the car, but inside, it felt eerily still, like a held breath. And then I saw it. The coffin covering my father's face had been pulled aside. It lay bunched at his neck, exposing his still features. His eyes were closed, his mouth slack, but the shroud was no longer neat. Someone or something had wanted to see his face. My cousin let out a small cry and grabbed my arm. The driver muttered a prayer, fumbling for his phone. No signal. I felt my own heart hammering in my throat. Then, through the hiss of the rain, another sound rose. The crying. The same high, thin wails we had heard at the mosque. But now, they were closer, not from far-off trees, but from somewhere just behind the car. A chorus of small voices, sobbing and whispering in a language I couldn't make out. I turned to the back window. Lightning lit up the road behind us for a split second, and in that flash I thought I saw movement. Small, dark shapes between the trees, darting and crouching. Faces, pale as ash, turned toward us, mouths open as if wailing. "They're following," my cousin whispered. I couldn't speak. My hands had gone cold. The driver slammed his palm against the dashboard. "We have to get out," he said. "We have to do something." Before we could decide, a figure appeared in the road ahead, walking toward us through the downpour. He came from nowhere, as if the rain itself had shaped him. A man, tall and thin, wearing a soaked kurta that clung to his bones. His face was shadowed by the brim of a wet cap. He stopped beside the car and knocked on the driver's window. We hesitated, then the driver rolled it down an inch. Rain sprayed in, cold and sharp. "You cannot go further," the man said in a flat, urgent voice. "Bury him here." "What?" My cousin's voice cracked. "Here? Are you mad?" The man pointed to a hollow by the roadside, invisible in the dark, but somehow clear to him. "I have prepared a place. The ground ahead will not take him. Bury him here." I stared at him, rain running down my face. "Who are you?" I asked. He didn't answer. He only looked past me, into the back of the car, at the coffin with the shifted lid. His eyes flicked once toward mine, and in that instant I felt something pass between us, not recognition, but a cold, weightless knowledge. Behind us the crying rose, a wail that almost drowned out the storm. The driver tried the engine again. This time, it sputtered, coughed, and caught. The headlights flared weakly to life. Without another word, the stranger stepped back into the rain, vanishing toward the trees. We lurched forward, the tires hissing on the wet road. My cousin kept glancing at the coffin. I kept glancing at the mirror. The crying did not fade. When at last, the other car appeared ahead of us, its red taillights glowing faintly through the rain. I felt my lungs release. We pulled alongside them, gesturing desperately. They slowed, but their faces were pale, unreadable. For a moment, both cars idled on the dark road, rain hammering the roofs, and I thought, we are not alone out here. As we started moving again, the coffin lay silent behind us, but the coffin still hung loose from my father's face, and the sound of unseen weeping still clung to the night. This was only the middle of the journey. The hardest part was still ahead. The road narrowed as we drove, a thin strip of cracked asphalt winding between drenched rice fields and black, dripping trees. The rain never let up. It came in curtains, sweeping sideways across the headlights, making it feel as if we were underwater. Both cars moved slowly now, one behind the other, like frightened animals sticking close together. I kept looking back at the coffin. The lid had settled again, but the coffin was still loose. My cousin wouldn't even look at it. He sat rigid, lips moving soundlessly, fingers twisting his tasbih. The driver's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. We were only a few kilometers from home, yet the journey felt endless, like we were driving through a tunnel with no exit. Then our headlights hit something strange on the roadside, a figure waving both arms, soaked to the skin. As we slowed, I recognized him, the same stranger from before, the one who had walked out of the rain. Somehow he was here ahead of us, though we had never seen him pass. He pointed again, this time toward a dark patch of land, just beyond a cluster of trees. This way, he called over the storm. The grave is ready. Nobody spoke. The driver pressed the accelerator, as if speed would dissolve the image. The man's figure vanished into the rain behind us. The crying began again. It had faded as we left the mosque, but now, returned. Louder, closer. Small, broken voices riding the wind, echoing in the dark spaces between trees. I tried to tell myself it was just the sound of water running through the drains, or animals calling, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Finally, after what felt like hours, we reached our family's graveyard. We spilled out of the cars, shivering in the storm. The headlights illuminated rows of graves, small mounds, some with broken headstones, some new and smooth. Every one of them was half submerged. Rainwater pooled in the hollows, turning the cemetery into a flooded field. This can't be, cousin whispered. It was dry this morning. We walked to the spot we had prepared for my father. It was a pit of muddy water, the bottom invisible. The gravediggers we had hired stood nearby, their clothes clinging to their skin, faces pale with the knees. One of them muttered, "I've never seen it like this. Not in this season." The driver wiped his face with a trembling hand. "We can't bury him here," he said. "The coffin will float." We checked the neighboring plots. They were all the same. Waterlogged, the earth soft and unwilling. The storm raged overhead, but the ground felt strangely heavy, like something beneath it was pushing upward. Then, through the rain, a voice called, "Here." We turned. The stranger was back again, standing by a low rise at the edge of the cemetery, where the water did not reach. How he had arrived without a sound, I do not know. He beckoned us, his hand steady. "This ground is clean," he said. "It will take him." We hesitated. Everything in me wanted to refuse to take my father's body home, to wait, to do anything but this. But the storm had worn us down. The crying from the trees swelled again, high and thin, as if urging us on. My cousin gripped my arm. "We have no choice," he said. Together, we carried the coffin to the spot the stranger indicated. The ground there was firm and dry, though the rain fell just as hard. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn. On one side mud and water, on the other solid earth. We set the coffin down and began to dig. Mud clung to our hands. Rain plastered our hair to our faces. The stranger stood silently nearby, watching. When the grave was ready, we lowered my father into it. Water trickled in, but did not fill it as it had in the other plots. The earth seemed to accept him. As we covered him, the crying from the trees began to fade. It didn't stop all at once. It ebbed slowly, like a tide pulling back. By the time we patted the last clumps of earth into place, only the sound of the rain remained. When we turned to thank the stranger, he was gone. Only the impression of his footprints remained in the wet ground, filling slowly with water. Later that night, when the rain softened to a mist, we went to see the imam. We were exhausted, our clothes still damp, our hearts heavy. He listened to our story without interrupting, his eyes closed. When we finished, he sighed and spoke softly. "Your father," he said, "was a friend to many you could not see. He had eyes beyond this world. Those cries you heard were not of children. They were the grief of beings you do not understand. They wanted to see his face one last time. They dug where you buried him." I sat there, numb. "But why?" I asked. The imam's gaze was steady. "Kindness draws many kinds of love. Even jinn mourn." He spread his hands. "It is not for us to know all reasons, but your father is at peace." His words did not banish the memory of the cries or the stranger in the rain, but they gave shape to the fear, a way to hold it without being crushed. That night, lying awake, I could still hear the rain, but for the first time since my father's death, the air felt still again, like a door had quietly closed. That night, after we returned from the burial, the rain finally slowed to a mist. The house felt heavy and strange, like it was holding its breath. Every room smelled faintly of wet earth and coffin, as though the grave itself had followed us home. My clothes clung to me, still damp, but I couldn't find the energy to change. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. They were streaked with mud, fingernails packed with soil from my father's grave. I tried to sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, the images returned. The stranger's face in the rain, the coffin lid moving on its own, the crying voices drifting from the jungle. Even though the imam had explained everything, that my father had eyes beyond the visible, that jinn mourn like humans, my heart refused to be quiet. It was one thing to hear such stories. It was another to live them. Around midnight, when the house had gone silent and my relatives were sleeping, I heard something, a soft rustling, like wings brushing against the walls. I froze. The sound grew louder, moving slowly down the hallway toward my room. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't the wind. It was as if 1,000 tiny feathers were sliding across the ceiling. Then it stopped. I held my breath. My door, which I had closed, creaked open just an inch. A cold draft slid inside. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow on the threshold. Not a person, but something tall and thin, its edges shimmering like heat on a road. It did not step inside. It only lingered there, a shape in the dim light, and then it was gone. The door swung shut softly, like a hand had pressed it. I sat upright, heart pounding, clutching the blanket. In that moment, strangely, I felt no terror, only a deep, aching sadness, the kind you feel when someone you love walks away for the last time. At dawn, the house was filled with the calls of birds. Hundreds of them perched on the trees around our yard, their feathers glinting in the pale sunlight. They weren't noisy or chaotic this time. They sat still, facing the house, as though keeping watch. When I stepped outside, they rose together, a single dark wave, and vanished into the sky. That day, as we prepared food for the mourners, I went to see the imam once more. I told him about the shadow and the birds. He listened quietly, then said, "It is finished now. They have come and gone. When a man of your father's kind passes, the unseen will mark their farewell. That is all. Do not fear it. Remember him with prayers. That is the tie you still hold." His words settled in my chest like a stone in calm water. I realized then that the fear I had carried wasn't just about the strange events, it was about losing my father, about stepping into a world without his guidance. That night, when I lay down again, the house was silent. No wings, no shadows, only the steady sound of my own breath. Even now, years later, when it rains hard at night, I sometimes wake up and think I hear faint crying beyond the trees. It no longer frightens me. Instead, it reminds me of that night. The storm, the stranger, the birds, the grave, and of my father's quiet kindness, which had reached far beyond what any of us could see. And each time, before I drift back to sleep, I whisper a prayer for him. The end. Did you enjoy the story? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Horror Dream. Want more stories like this? Subscribe to The Horror Dream, and we'll bring you more darkness, just for you. If you enjoy a little chill down your spine, stick around, like, share, and hit that subscribe button right here on The Horror Dream. Your support keeps us going, so stay with us. Subscribe to The Horror Dream for more spine-tingling tales.